We have a really great panel that is going to talk about women in cybersecurity. Only 20% of cybersecurity has women in it, even though women are some of the best programmers, best managers. They have better emotional quotient than most of us men. So we have Chenxi Wang and a great panel. Chenxi, thank you very much, and this mic is yours.
All right. Thank you for coming. This is a security track session, but we're going to talk a little bit about diversity, equity, and inclusion with security people. So my name is Chenxi Wang. I'm the founder and general partner of Rain Capital. We are a cybersecurity-focused venture fund. I've also spent a long time in the industry, and I've known a lot of you and you guys on stage. So it's an honor for me to be here speaking at TiEcon and run a session. So I'm going to turn over to my panelists to introduce themselves, and this is D&I panel, but we have a ton of brain power on stage. So I'll start with you, Renuka.
Thank you, Chenxi. My name is Renuka Nadkarni. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Renuka. We are SASE as a service company, and I run the engineering, product management, the cloud operations. So essentially, I am responsible for the strategy and the execution. Prior to Renuka, I spent 20 years in the cybersecurity space, and I have pretty much built every single kind of security product from the networking perspective that's out there. So super excited to be here, and really glad to be with this panel of really accomplished women here.
Aanchal?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Aanchal Gupta. I am CVP and Deputy CISO at Microsoft. I don't even want to mention how many years of experience I have had in security, because it reminds me of the scar marks you get as you are doing these battles and firefighting. And I've been around the block a bit with Microsoft, Facebook, Skype, Yahoo, and some startups too there. So I'm sure we'll have a great conversation.
Tschudy?
Thank you. Super honored to be here and amongst great, great women. I am the Chief People Officer at ForgeRock. My work history has, for many, many years, like you not wanting to mention exactly how many, has been in technology. Companies like AOL, Netscape, Time Warner, long tenure at Cisco, and then ultimately really meeting a massive career objective, which is getting to CPO at ForgeRock. So super excited to be here.
All right, so we will be taking some questions at the end from the audience, so don't be shy. But I'll start with some of the questions that we discussed. Speaking of D&I, it has evolved, the concept has evolved over a period of time, and now we're talking a lot about equity from just diversity and inclusion. So I'll start with you, because you've done a lot of work building community and looking at Prime the pipeline. Tell us a little bit more about what your concept of D&I is today, and let's make it brief so we can get to more of the discussion.
Yeah. So Chenxi, we have come a long way, first of all. Initially, it was all about diversity and inclusion. And what has happened is when we were talking about diversity and inclusion, the message was always to the minorities or to the women in terms of what should you do, how should you behave, and how should you fit in. What has happened over the last 5 years is the concept of equity has emerged, which is, and this also is an effect of Gen Z, where Gen Z is coming to the workforce, and it's less about I want to fit in, it's more about I want to be who I am, and I want to represent who I am. So I think there's a tremendous shift. If you look at the numbers, you'll see the numbers have changed from 14% to 28% over the last few years. But I think we are in really good times, and I'm super delighted by the acceleration towards the whole equity conversation that's happening.
And maybe I'll just add on to that a little bit, because I think we'll get to the end of this, of what is it that we can do at our companies and what can we do individually. But also the thing that I think is really powerful of the notion of introducing equity and how you see the shift in the representation is, even from the conversation I was just sitting in a little bit before this, is that new skills are emerging. New capabilities are emerging, not only in the technology, not only in the way we're innovating in our product or generative AI, but what's needed in the workplace is new and differentiated. In many cases, some of the diverse and underrepresented populations bring those skills. Skills like resilience, skills like adaptivity, skills like courage. So I really like this notion of equity, and I even think for many people it's about how we harmonize into the opportunity, not how we conform or integrate, but how we bring what we have that's unique and different and really make it better.
So Aanchal, I'll ask you specifically on the point of equity, right? So you, just such a wonderful leader that I've known you for years, right, from Facebook and now Microsoft, and she's now sitting on the board of a public company, right? And so she and I belong in the same community. We'll talk about that a little bit later, a senior women community. And we often have meetups and we talk about how, yeah, we can do this. We can sit on boards. And I'm a founder of a venture fund. And people say, oh, you're a woman, you're a founder of a venture fund. I'm like, there's no surprise. We can do it. So tell me how you get to where you are today and thinking, maybe not thinking about equity, but in hindsight, how equity has played into your role and also your environment, right?
Yeah, this is a very good question, and I think especially, it goes actually for both men and women, especially after we have gone through this era of COVID, because that has tested our boundaries at home, at work, and there were days when we could send our kids to daycare or to schools, but last 2-3 years it has been so challenging, and we all have been that caregiver, whether to aging parents at home or to kids. And how do you still bring this 200% to work, and then you want to also do these other things like board service? Chenxi and I are fairly active in our community too, so we still want to continue to do that. So I would say this equity starts at home. Ask your life partner to help you, participate with you in everything. And then you should do the exact same thing at work. Don't be just like, I'm saying yes to everything. No, what are the priority items? What are the things you need to go and focus on? Because if everything on your list is priority, then nothing is priority. So identify your top 3 to 5 priority items, go focus on those, and let the other things, if they have to slip by, let them slip by, because you cannot be good at everything.
Totally agree with that. You cannot be good at everything, and you have to focus, right? So, for instance, when I remember that board discussion, right, we had, and it was actually an opportunity came to the group that we both were in, and I looked at, they were looking for someone in cybersecurity and with crypto experience, and I was like, Aanchal. She's the one, because she was head of security for Calibra, right, at Facebook. So the first discussion we had with the board recruiter, she was like, well, you know, Aanchal's great, but she didn't have any board experience. I'm like, well, you have to start somewhere. And don't, just because she didn't have board experience, refuse to interview her. And lo and behold, you are the board member, right? And so
but Chenxi, that also speaks about the allyship. And we need to be ally for each other. And Chenxi was that ally for me when the recruiter was pushing back. And Chenxi was like, no, you need to talk to this person. So we have to stand up for each other, and we really need to represent each other.
And that goes for everybody, right? So not just because I'm a woman, I bring other women onto senior positions and boards, and I think equity cannot be done without everybody on board. So it doesn't matter if you're men, you are in a powerful position in your company, you need to think about how you could include more diverse profiles into your group and your environment. So switch gear a little bit about when we were prepping, and Tschudy, and you in your position, you must get this question a lot, which is the pipeline, right? And so I'm an investor, and everybody always asking, how do you find those women founders? how do you find diverse employees in your organization? And I'm going to come back to you, Tschudy, a little bit later on priming the pipeline. So tell us a little bit about the practices that you follow.
Yeah, and it's a really important one. And at ForgeRock, as an example, I mean, last year was just a year of massive growth, and you don't want to yet let those years pass you by and then go, oh, I wish I had gotten better representation at the point in time when I was hiring. And there's a few things. I mean, some of them will not be materially new, but important to invest nonetheless. Look, my talent acquisition organization is a line of first defense. I've got to have them trained in bias. I've got to have them really understanding and seeing full individuals as they come into the life cycle. I need them feeling empowered to have really courageous conversations with the hiring manager about what they're missing. The very thing you just said. They don't have board experience, but until they get it, they will never have it. Let's take a risk. Let's give them a chance. So important. So that talent acquisition organization is not just a means to an end. They're a very critical partner. They understand and know talent, and absolutely when put goals in front of them about representing and bringing diverse slates to the hiring managers, they deliver as long as you support and empower them. And then, of course, on the other side is with our hiring managers. We can talk a lot about the power of diverse teams, how much more value they drive, the way that people feel being a part of them. But the other thing is just to teach those hiring managers how to be good at leading diverse teams. And you talked about how it's changed because of COVID. One of those aspects has been leading hybrid teams. And about part of that, which I love, is it somewhat leveled the playing field, but it also opened up the opportunity for people to let go of past practices and beliefs and introduce them to new and even get them in a place of being open to doing things differently. So we deeply invest in our hiring managers to understand not only each individual, not that they're just seen and heard, but to reward and recognize when they do acquire really diverse and differentiated talent. And then we have the ability to celebrate that at a company level. But I will tell you those two things, both investment in empowering our talent acquisition organization and absolutely seeing and holding hiring managers accountable for building diverse teams, helping them to do that in a way that they feel safe and that they'll be successul, and then rewarding both.
Having the right incentives is where you drive behavior change, right? If I may touch on that point one more in the practice front, are there new and diverse channels of which you tap into for drawing diverse talent?
You know, a lot of the channels have stayed consistent. So you think about communities like Grace Hopper. You know, they're really strategic organizations that continue. They have a brand, they have commitment, they show up again and again. They're absolutely tried and true, and they have evolved in their own, the way that they bring thought leadership, the way that they introduce and train their own community members, that's for sure. And then you see a lot of organizations really putting emphasis inside their own, company. I would use one of the consulting firms that decided to start their own kind of nonprofit arm that takes diverse communities from around the United States, invests in them in cybersecurity training, takes them through sequence certification programs, and then in their network opens them up to be the pipeline of talent into companies. I love that. It doesn't have to just be for that consulting firm, but they build it because they know that seeding talent into multiple organizations in the place of cybersecurity will ultimately mean longevity for their business. So when you're a company the size of ForgeRock, I can't build all of that inside this company. I'm not big enough. But using organizations like that, NPower is an example. They just really nurture, from veterans to women to individuals of color, and they help bring them into those levels of skills and experience that when they come into the company, they can be successful.
Yeah, speaking of Grace Hopper Conference, it's a great platform to hire fresh talent out of school. Facebook, Google, many large companies will have a booth there for recruiting. Even small companies, you can go there and send someone on your hiring team to Grace Hopper. I mean, that's one of the conferences where there's a huge line of bathroom outside the women's room.
And I think, Chenxi, you and I both have been on the review boards for Grace Hopper
that was
for multiple years.
That's right.
It's really good to see the submissions that come into Grace Hopper, the amount of talent you see outside, because there we encourage a lot of diverse talent to apply. So it's amazing experience.
Yeah, it's and I have to say, as a first-year graduate student, I was sent to Grace Hopper. My advisor sent me to Grace Hopper to get educated, and that was one of the most inspirational events in my life. So if you have junior women in your group, that's consider sending them to this conference. I can tell you they'll come back and inspired. Renuka, we talked a lot in the prepping call about priming the pipeline, right? And so you have some specific initiatives that you're heading. Tell us a little bit more about what you're doing with younger talent.
Yeah, so Chenxi, one of the things I realized was there's a lot of intimidation in women when they talk about technology, and it even gets, it gets worse when you talk about cybersecurity. So I have 2 daughters who are teenagers and they're friends, and I interacted with them, and it was abundantly clear that they thought they couldn't see themselves in those kinds of roles. Like they thought it was something that was completely outside of their scope. And I was fortunate enough that I said, hey, I need to root cause this problem, I need to solve this. One way to get people comfortable is to allow them to interact, to actually learn, to really demystify what is this big hoopla about technology or cybersecurity, right? So I was able to build a software, cloud delivered, it's called Capture the Flag software, and it allowed kids to, so I ran workshop, and the way software was built, I ran a mentorship program at the University of Washington. I had 2 groups of students who built this software for me. And what this software was super simple. It was actually games that were written by high schoolers, like rock, paper, scissors, and they were all hosted in the cloud. And you could play the game, and on the right side you could see the code. And then I also had some ciphers that people could come in and they could, solve the puzzles. So what I did was I built that software by the students, and then I had student volunteers, high schoolers. I work with Tech Bridges organization. It's a community for BIPOC girls. And we had 120 middle schoolers and high schoolers come in and play with that software. Right? So now what you've done is you're creating a self-sustaining model where more students are educating other students, and it's actually building a community of young women who can feel more comfortable with cybersecurity. So I was very fortunate to be able to do that, and it was very rewarding for me when I looked at it, and when I saw these young kids doing the workshops, and they used to always get amused. Because this is a game you play, you know this game. You play rock, paper, scissors all the time. And they used to be very amused to see the code. So my thing is catch them young. Honestly, it's like go to middle schools, go to high schools. I go volunteer, I do speaking sessions at schools to inspire kids, and specifically in cybersecurity.
So, one last discussion topic. DE&I, I think it was not for people like us. These women are going to be successful no matter what, because we're aggressive, maybe not aggressive, but we're assertive, and we believe in ourselves. I think DEI is for people who may be a little bit less than us in terms of confidence, in terms of their ability to assert themselves in environments. So I'll tell you a story very quickly, then we'll finish up. 2014, you might remember Salesforce went through a pay equity initiative. They put down $3 million to erase the pay gap. Do you know how this came about? The head of Desk.com, which is a woman who had a great year, and she was given stocks to distribute extra bonus. She has 4 VPs, 2 men, 2 women, and she had 4 individual meetings, and she divided up the bonus into 4 equal piles and gave to them. The 2 women were super happy. They're like, great, thank you for the extra bonus, looking forward to another year. The 2 men were pissed off. They were like, we had a great year, I expected more. And so she was taken aback at the very stark reaction between the 2 genders. And then she started having conversation with other managers at her level, and she found out a lot of same behavior. So she went to the head of HR, she said, hey, can we do a salary review? And then they took the whole thing to Mark Benioff, and Mark's like, oh, I don't think we pay people differently based on gender, but if you really want to do a review, you can do a review. So they did a review, and they found pay gaps, and mostly because women come in with less to begin with, and even if you raise them the same percentage, they end up being less, right? So they actually did this project to erase the pay gap because they want to retain talent. Now, we are going from the pipeline question to retention. So I'll start with you, Tschudy, because you know, Chief People Officer, retention is a big thing, right? Not just recruiting. What do you do today to retain diverse talent and telling them that they have a growth ahead of them in your company?
Yeah, and by the way, what you're talking about in certain terms of the practices are so important to stand behind as a company, and we do that through nearly every program and a retrospective review to hold ourselves accountable that such things aren't happening at the company. So a few things that we do, and one of the things is to ask that community, what do they need? What from the company can we do to support you? What's interesting, we had a lunch with women across the company when we were together for our sales kickoff, and they gave some really good feedback about a stage in life that they were going through that they were struggling with. So we brought a thought leader in. We're able to talk about that. What are they seeing? What are they doing? How can they care for themselves? That's meaningful because they believe then and can see that the company sees them. They not only understand me, but they see me and they can respond to something that I'm asking for or about. The other thing that we do is and I'll come back to this, I'm so convinced that the role of a people manager is where it's at. So it's ensuring that our people managers are connecting and paying attention to those individuals on their teams on a very regular basis. That they're being vulnerable in those conversations about what's working and what's not working, and what can I, as your manager, do better or differently. When you talk about some of these things of how our lives have shifted, and this notion of like, could you just give me a little bit more slack on Wednesdays because that's where I care for my community. I deliver meals to the homeless, and if you could just understand and know that I'm going to clear my calendar for those 2 hours, but I promise, I'll be back online at X time. Those kind of opening up to those conversations make a big difference. The last thing I would say in terms of that retention, when I mentioned bringing on talent in a year like we had last year, this notion of harmonization is really important. So we ask and invite them into designing, delivering, helping us evolve existing programs so that they too can have their fingerprints on what we do and how we do it.
We need to have a session with Tschudy next year just to have her go through this program, I think. 3 more minutes. So one tip on retention, one tip on retention.
I would say when you're looking at your team, create a career growth path for your team members. Because most of the time people leave because they feel like they're tapped out and they feel they need to go to another company or do something else. So if you really build that path for them, for us, if you are in, say, a security analyst role, you can get into a security investigator. And from there you can go into a security researcher. And people really love that, oh my God, I can really progress in my career and I can be that person. And then you establish a mentor-coach relationship with some of the folks. So they can look up, they can learn those skills, and in a couple of years they can be in that next role. That's how we deal with the challenge of attrition or anything related to pipeline too, because when you can grow your folks, you don't run into as many pipeline challenges as well.
Yeah, see, one thing that was shocking to me was during the COVID, apparently the dropouts of women employees was way higher than men, okay? And it kind of makes sense because you're now doing things at home and you need to work and so on. So one of the tip that worked for us, and at Renuka, we have women communities, okay? And this goes back to Aanchal's point, which is build a support system. And what happens is everybody has similar problems. Like everybody goes through the maternity, everybody has, small kids to take care of. And what happens is us sharing with each other what those learnings are goes a very long way. So outside of HR conversations and so on, right, there has to be a community at work where you can openly share your personal problems and take tips from other people. It could be super simple, how you communicate, how you build support system, how you can take help from friends, family, whoever, right? So I think that is a huge change that we noticed at least.
Community at work. I'm just close this up with one more thing. I think it's really important for diverse employees to have a support system outside your company as well, in the community, in the industry, to look for guidance that may be a little bit more removed from your company, which is a healthy distance away. So with that, I'm going to join me thanking the panelists, and hopefully we'll have more of this kind of discussion.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Oh, we have questions. We have questions. Okay. Sorry. Yes.
Miss Alana has a great story. I would like her to say that.
Hi, everyone. So first of all, thank you for the wonderful panel on women's empowerment. I'm an electronic engineer in tech for about almost 30 years now, and I know exactly the struggles that you guys are talking about, as well as filling the pipeline. So I wanted to comment on a couple of things. So I have 2 young daughters myself, right, and they are set up for success because they have a mom and a role model and someone to help guide them and navigate them through the process of becoming a physicist and a mechanical engineer. That's their goal. However, there are those populations where there are students who don't have those role models. And so I wanted to first comment on 2 efforts that I've been doing to help address those problems. The first was about 12 years ago when I was working at Yahoo in cybersecurity. I actually am bald. I wear a wig, so this is actually me. And when Yahoo heard my story about how I struggled all my life living with a disease called alopecia universalis, and how I wanted to help disadvantaged people who felt left out, who felt alone, and felt like they didn't have anyone to show them the way, that I wanted to build this nonprofit. So I built that, and we served over 25,000 kids, many from very disadvantaged families with no skills or roles.
What's the name of the nonprofit?
The nonprofit's called Boldly Me. So I used to call it Boldly Bald, and then a bunch of disadvantaged kids came to me that were quite frankly suicidal and depressed, and then I learned, oh, you know what, I got to make this broader. My husband's like, well, call it Boldly Me. Everybody wants to be boldly themselves. So that was 12 years ago, and now, we've stopped 209 suicides, and we stopped 8 children who were starting to buy guns. Thanks, everyone. Starting to buy guns to do mass shooting, and we were able to teach them emotional regulation. The piece so I have a cyber background and a technical background, and so the thing that has come out at RSA, which is where I met Sam, is that there's this gap between actually having a pool of talent to pull from. So we built in a cyber well-being curriculum for elderly as well as children for K-12 education. We are working with 31 school link services directors to implement that curriculum into Silicon Valley schools through Senator Cortez's program. So I work really closely with Senator Cortez. So that's the first piece. The second piece is my day job, because I can't make a living and pay for my kids' college on a nonprofit salary, is working at Juniper Networks. And so Juniper, through our transformation from building critical enterprise systems to actually transforming to focusing on the cloud and enterprise, have found a lot of work that we need done. And we've been able to tap into very poor demographics. So the profile is Hispanic. Mom is, a maid at a hotel. Dad is a gardener. Sometimes the moms stay at home and the dad's working at Goodwill. So very poor disadvantage. We have an internship program at Juniper where we take these children and they have a mentor. I supervise 5 of them. I've trained them basic networking. I've trained them cyber awareness. I'm training them network segmentation. I'm teaching them server and OS patching. And they are doing phenomenal and knocking out of the park, but they just don't have the opportunity.
Thank you so much.
Okay, sorry. Okay, you're welcome.
That's awesome.
Amazing story. Thank you so much.
We need to have you on the panel next year.
Yes,
That's what we need. You on the panel.
Any other quick questions? We had one more question we can take. Right there. Thanks for the opportunity to ask the question. I'll just ask everyone for a quick response. Is that, so over the past years, there's been a lot of focus on DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. But when times got tough over the past year, there has been a major impact on the same hires that were made for DEI purposes. They're the first persons out as well, or they've been impacted more over the layoffs of 2022 and 2023 that are going on. So it makes sense to talk about DEI for hiring, but we talked about retention, but it's also affecting in the layoff situation for the same communities as well. So how do you tackle that, right? Like, it's great to funnel in talent, but retaining it, and now when times get tough, they're impacted more as well. So any thoughts on that and how you guys are tackling?
Yeah, actually I have a very interesting story. I was running a D&I workshop once, and we had a group of 8 men, and we were talking about D&I, and they were like, hey, Renuka, D&I is all great, but in my previous company, there was this SVP woman, who was clearly hired for the D&I purposes. She wasn't really good at her work, and she wasn't really, high performer. And I didn't know how to answer that. I looked at him for a couple of seconds, and then it occurred to me, I said, hey, have you never met a low-performing SVP at your company who is a man? Seriously? So the bottom line of the conversation is, women and men come in all sizes and shapes and capabilities and performance, right? Somehow I feel women are held to a different standard of performance, right? So I think that's my experience.
So I actually have a question for you when you were asking that question. I wonder why you mark these people as D&I highs. Right? Why aren't they just hires, right? You may have improved your pipeline for D&I purposes, but everybody should be under the same umbrella, right? So that would be my question.
I speak with the C-suite of these organizations, and the way they speak, because I'm not in the hiring position with them, right? They tell me that these are the quotas that they assign, they create jar teams. For DEI purposes, we want this much people of color, or this much people from these communities. So my question is not based on their merits or ability to do the job. They're fantastic, if not better. But
go ahead. I think every company definitely says this is our goal for D&I. But no company would ever say we are lowering our bar to hire for these people with different backgrounds. So there is a very clear distinction, and I think no one should, and even we should not feel this imposter syndrome when we go into these roles, that we are hired because I'm a female. No, we are hired for the talent, for the skills we are bringing to the table. And it is very important for this room, for all of us to internalize that we are hired for our skills, what we are bringing to the table. Otherwise, you will be questioning yourself more than others questioning you.
And look, companies that have to go into reductions in force, it is one of the, if not the hardest thing you do inside a company. It's hard for individuals for whom it happens to, it's hard for teams that are impacted, it's hard for leaders who have to make the decision. And I have a lot of empathy for those folks in that role. And I think the notion of kind of quotas or those in terms of what you're reducing is a bad practice. So, and I'm sure there's lots of bad practices out there that need to be brought to the latest and greatest. And it does happen, and sometimes it's not what individuals want. I would say a couple of this gets back to when we're in a position to make those decisions, we have to make sure we're looking really deeply and hard at the reasons for that. So the point being, are we believing that because of an ethnicity or gender, you're just naturally not a fit? What are we doing to really inspect that decision? Is that really the right and fair and just decision? And the other is, for each of us, you talked about sponsors, allies, we can each take it upon ourselves to help those individuals in that phase to find what's next. And definitely when they're in our company, understand why and how they feel the way they do at times, when businesses pivot, when markets start to crumble a little bit. Why do they get recluse? Why might they get more anxious or nervous? Understand what that is and how to support and help them to focus on work and continuing to be successful. But it's not an enviable position, and we clearly have a lot of ways to go if some of the feeling is that it's like at the expense of some really good efforts at the front of that life cycle that get the worst of it at the back. Then we need to do better work.
Thank you. Thank you. We need to change the perception too. Practices and perception. Great.
Thank you, everyone.